The Slowdown, episode 11 of season 2.
Woohoo!
This is the penultimate episode, not just of the Slowdown, it turns out, but of this series.
hmm
Because after next month's series finale, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. And we'll probably talk more about that next month, which is going to be big for a lot of different reasons. But we'll talk about that at the end of this show, I think.
Awesome.
Tonight, we are here to talk about the debut feature of Oscar winner, and people, might have forgotten this because of the fiasco that happened on Oscar night in, was it 2018?
2017.
2017, okay.
Yeah, it might have been 2018. Wait, the record says 2017.
Okay, and that's probably right. It's just,
Right.
as my wife informed me the other night, with COVID, there's like this weird gap year where everything is just off by a year when you're thinking about time. So we are...
Right here it says Best Adapted Screenplay 2019, Best Director 2017, Best Adapted Screenplay 2017. Maybe, anyway, somewhere around there.
Okay, so Barry Jenkins, Oscar winner of Moonlight, started off about probably 8-9 years before that with a film, a smaller film, truly independent, and from what I understand, pretty revolutionary, called Medicine for Melancholy. And we're going to talk about that tonight. He
Released in 2008.
Yeah. He seems to have a thing for M titles. There's Moonlight and Medicine for Melancholy.
There we go.
But,
I think he's directed maybe 5 things, large projects since then. So 2 out of 5 M's. Yeah, could be. You might have a theory there.
Now, are you counting, because this other thing he did was, I don't know if it's a movie or if it's a 10-part series for, what was it, Amazon, The Underground Railroad, which I haven't seen.
10 episode series. He did Medicine for Melancholy was the feature. Then he did Moonlight. He did If Beale Street Could Talk. And that, I believe, was some kind of either a feature that was released online, or maybe it was a theatrical feature.
No, it was theatrical, yeah.
Good. And then he did the Underground Railroad. Those were his major works. But he's produced, associate produced, executive produced. He's done some short films. I'm just looking at his IMDb.
Yeah.
But those are the major works. Those 4 things that I mentioned so far. And he's doing. Let me see, Lion King, I believe.
The Lion King?
I think he's gonna direct a sort of a live version of Lion King. That's what I heard last.
Would this be like the Broadway play or something?
Hold on. There's a thing called Flint Strong. Oh, that's something else. Well, yeah, don't take my word for it, but I thought he was slated to direct a realistic remake of The Lion King.
Because Jon Favreau just did the Lion King live realistic animal capture thing from a couple of years ago. So I don't know, unless they were going to do like an adaptation of the Broadway or this Broadway hit play with all those crazy costumes and things. But
okay, let me see what they say. The Lion King sequel, Barry Jenkins to direct, to helm for Walt Disney Studios. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
Oh,
He's going to do a sequel.
All right. This, just for the record, moving forward, this is the kind of information that even if you see it on a screen, don't share it with me until the end, after we've talked about the film at hand, because now I just want to go hide.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You never know how it'll turn out. Plus, it's Disney. Plus, Barry has to make some money, so it's all good.
I don't think he's hurting. If I had to, if I had to guess. Although it's weird. I had not heard of Medicine for Melancholy. I have not seen If Beale Street Could Talk. I've not seen The Underground Railroad. In truth, I have not seen all of Moonlight. I watched the first 2 out of the 3 stories, chapters in that film, but I think I started it way too late at night. And then the end of it was like, from what I had heard, the heaviest section. I just never got back to it, so I got.
I haven't seen anything of the major works besides Medicine for Melancholy because I've been too busy trying to make my own movies.
Wow. Well,
but I plan on catching up.
Maybe at some point we could talk about Moonlight. We could just catch up on it.
Yeah, or just we could do the major works of Barry Jenkins, have an episode on that. It's a possibility.
Yeah. But so I had not heard of this film until you had recommended it to me. I kind of thought that Jenkins kind of popped onto the radar with Moonlight. Yeah. And it's pretty amazing to see as if that was his second feature, the big jump from, you know, his first film, which is, you know, scrappy and independent, but very artistically, you know, inventive and, you know, topical for sure. And then jumping to something like Moonlight, which definitely has more of a budget and more of a polish to it.
Yeah, that was almost, yeah, that was a number of years later.
Yeah.
2008, maybe almost 10 years, 8, 9, 10 years later, depending on where you count production or release.
Right.
2008 to 2017, that's a long time period. I'm sure he did maybe commercial work and smaller shorts. I know he did shorts and for various projects, and I'm sure his skills and what he wanted to accomplish grew over time.
Yeah. And then certainly the scope of his ambition has continued to grow even after Moonlight. You know, he's doing a 10-part drama series about, you know, the Underground Railroad.
Before we begin, you heard about Apichapang Versatekul getting a jury prize at Cannes, right?
I did hear about that. I think mostly I saw it from you on Twitter, but I haven't had a chance to follow up. What happened? What is this movie?
Memoria is the title, with Tilda Swinton. She's an expat who lives in Colombia. Then she starts hearing a strange noise and starts investigating.
Is it like a creature that lives out in the woods?
They are not saying. I have a rough idea what it might be from what I read, but we'll have to watch the movie. And since we liked Uncle Bunmi, we could do a follow-up episode on Versatekul on the new movie.
Yeah, and then the is it Julia Ducournau? I think it won the Palme d'Or. I don't know much about that movie either, but I know that her feature debut, Raw, from a few years ago, was quite striking. I saw that at the Music Box here in Chicago. Yeah, it's really weird and disturbing and cool. I don't remember exactly what I thought about it, but I remember being quite impressed. So definitely look it up.
Yeah, I will. I just brought up Versatekul because of the slow. We covered him. He's a slow cinema master that we talked about.
Well, you know, and even though I didn't know anything about the film or the circumstances, it is that kind of feeling of being into a great indie band who then gets discovered by everybody else, and like, oh my God, it's Uncle Bunmi.
That's right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, let's talk about Medicine for Melancholy. When
I have the money, I'll start a movie theater called Uncle Bunmi's.
Movies with Bunmi. Yeah, I like that.
That's right. Slow cinema.
So.
And slow romance editing is coming along well. Within a couple of days, it'll be done. I'm just working on music now.
Excellent. Yeah, and I really like the idea of you opening up a movie theater. I think you just call it slow cinema.
Slow cinema.
Like this, we're gonna go to the slow cinema.
Or the slow. The
slow, yes. But okay, so let's talk about this, the movie at hand. It's a 2008, I mean, it's contemporary to the era it was in. It's amazing to me just how long ago 2008 was. Nothing popped out at me greater than the fact that one character was sort of looking up information on another using MySpace.
Yep. MySpace is now gone.
Yes, but I've never used MySpace. I didn't get into social media until Facebook was king. But looking at MySpace, I didn't know how anybody used it. It looked really strange.
I had a MySpace account. It wasn't as slick as Twitter or Facebook.
Well, a few things are. But okay, so we've got these two characters who.
Before we begin on the movie, let me confess my connections to the movie.
Oh, okay. Confess away.
So in 2007, they did IFC Center did a film fest called Generation DIY, Mumblecore Movies. After seeing that, I did a blog post on DIY Filmmaker blog saying, there needs to be more diversity. And in the comment section, one of the producers for Medicine said, "Oh, we're about to shoot this movie called Medicine for Melancholy. It has 2 African American leads. Check it out." I posted a still image of that on my Twitter, and I tagged you, so you can follow up on that. And Matt Dentler, the then programmer of South by Southwest, saw that and got in touch with, they connected the Medicine team, and Dentler connected, and he invited the movie to South by Southwest. And that festival launched that movie and Barry Jenkins to the wider world. And I interviewed Jenkins in March of 2008. Did a very long interview. I tagged you on that. It's on Twitter also.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to him on the phone a bit. And I ran into Matt Dentler on the subway one day, and I ran into Wyatt Cenac, if that's how you pronounce his name, the lead actor of Medicine, on the subway in Brooklyn one day. We chatted. And I think those are all my connections to the movie.
Just those little details.
That's right.
So, in a manner of speaking, we could say that you are partially responsible for the glorious rocket-like career of Mr. Barry Jenkins.
Tiny bit towards the discovery of Medicine for Melancholy, but it's important to remember that that movie came out, got a lot of good press, but Barry Jenkins didn't get money, I assume, to do a new feature for almost 10 years. So getting awards and getting good press is not enough to launch a filmmaking career. But eventually he got it done, and he won the Oscar for Best Director, and now he's doing well.
Yeah. And that's sort of a testament to what we were talking about earlier. There's a lot of people who have first-time features who get some kind of notoriety. But I mean, this thing, not that this means anything, but because I don't have my ear to the ground on the world of independent cinema necessarily, or even mainstream stuff. I mean, hell, I'm surprised when half the stuff, comes across my inbox. I'm like, they made a movie out of that? But just the idea that it didn't make much of a pop cultural or even cultural blip the way that, say, Moonlight did a decade later. And that's, I would be very fascinated to find out what Jenkins was working on, in that kind of in-between period. Maybe he's talked about it. I just have to go do some digging.
Yeah, I think he's talked about it. I think he tried to get a couple of projects going, and he, I think, worked at I think he's a part owner or part of a company that creates ads and does other commercial video work. And I think he worked there, maybe writing. Yeah. I think you could Google it, and but no feature until Moonlight came out.
Yeah, well, so this movie essentially is, it's perfect that we're talking about it, because it reminds me a lot of Before Sunrise, and and like a lot of elements from that Linklater Before trilogy, but it's from, and I think we had talked about this. The desire to see a film like that, but with different kinds of people, and this is exactly what we're seeing with this movie. Although it's just a self-contained story, it'd be very interesting to see if Jenkins at some point decides to do a Linklater and 10 years go back and say, hey, what happened to Micah and Joe?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
It would be interesting, I would say, but this film, I watched it this afternoon, and I'm still kind of processing it. It's one of those rare occasions, and I ran into this in the middle section. As you'll recall, I was talking with you and Aaliyah during Before Sunset. That was the second one, right?
Before Sunset is the second one,
yeah. I love the filmmaking. I love the performances. I really could not get on board with the characters at all. And so I was in this very strange, frustrated state watching this, thinking back, why don't I like these characters? And I guess we can get into all that. But what was your, did you saw the film early? It was on your wavelength and your radar and all that. What did you make of it in 2008? How did this fit in with the kinds of films that you were saying you're calling for more representation in the indie film scene? I feel like 10 years later on, we've got more representation in the mainstream, and I assume independent film as well. It's not near perfect, but Did this strike you as something different and bold and necessary when you first saw it?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about at that time and even now, indie film and all of cinema needs to be more diverse because we have a gigantic, diverse country. And for a long time, many decades, minorities were left out of the filmmaking, Hollywood filmmaking at least, and some indie. I liked the movie from the beginning. I mean, the reason the movie was rewarded at film festivals and so many people liked it in the indie world was it's good. You know, it was a movie that a lot of people thought was good. I thought the multi-ethnic casting, having Black actors as the leads in this, you know, basically two people hanging out for one day, kind of like a Linklater type movie, was great. But aside from the politics, I thought even now when I watched it again, I thought it's a really charming movie, and I know people like those characters, so I had no problem, you know, accepting them as real and getting on board with how they are, their, you know, their personalities, and I think it's a charming, fun story. The politics are at one level, but I think what really makes it is the acting and the interactions between the two characters, the characters themselves, and then the overall vision of Barry Jenkins, how the movie was shot, how it was put together, sound design, cinematography. So I think it's a charming, fun movie. People should check it out for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to disagree on whether it's charming and fun. I thought
Sure.
it was, like, thematically, I thought it was pretty reprehensible.
Mhm.
But I will say, I want to ask you about this, you know, as a filmmaker, go ahead.
One thing we should do is, because this is a controversial topic or movie related to race, how we should tell people how we see that subject and our various connections to it. On my end, having grown up in Sri Lanka and seeing their civil war, identical looking people fighting each other for 30 years, motivated by politics, you know, I realized that race is politics. Same thing in the US, coming out of the colonialism, colonization experience and slavery. And that outside of that, that humans worldwide are very similar. So, you know, the sort of the separatist, light separatist politics of Micah, that's his name, right? Micah?
Yeah.
Yeah, Micah, I'm not with that. I'm more like a Joe character.
Yeah.
You know, saying, you know, that's just one way to look at things. So, and you said your father identifies as Black?
Well, he was Black. Yeah. I mean, he's passed
He
away
passed
now.
away? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't a matter of identification. He was a Black man.
No, I approached.
He identified as white, but he was Black. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
No. I approach it that way, you know, that topic that way now, because visually someone could look Black, but they could identify as Latin primarily. They could identify as, you know, Jamaican primarily. So to me, starting with how people identify is the way to, it's like the safer way to go. That's the only reason I said that.
Sure. I mean, I think if my father had been alive today, his head would have exploded with all this, you know, all the politics around race. I think he would have seen it kind of like the way I view it, as being like very regressive. I mean, I look at the conversation around race today, and I don't recognize it at all from when I was growing up in the 80s, or, you know, coming of age in the 90s, which was, and my father coming out of like the 60s and 70s, you know, the actual cultural movements that planted the seeds for where we are today. It's almost like we had sort of not in the perfect sense, but we were on a footing towards equality and accepting, you know, just look, if you want to talk about the context of America, thinking of ourselves as, you know, American. Now with this sort of the idea of everything is getting back towards racial identity and racial politics, you know, that's not the way he raised me. He didn't raise me as like, you know, you're a proud Black man and the white man's trying to keep you down. I'd be like, well, then why'd you marry my mom? You know, that kind of a deal. But, you know, that conversation is sticky, and I think it's worth like 6 podcast episodes if we want to get into it.
Sure, but this is very related to this movie. So That's the only reason I brought it up. So he was.
I'm on Team Joe, like with you. The stuff I understand where Micah was. Let me rephrase that. I don't understand where Micah is coming from. I understand that the arguments and the politics that he engages in is something that's very real and a lot of people share. I just find it regressive and unhelpful, and very much a young person's kind of an idea of like, hey, I just kind of showed up here. History, what's that?
Right. Well, so your dad was more conservative and assimilationist.
No.
Okay, but he was, at least he thought sort of groups of people, letting down their racial identities and working together was a good idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't say assimilation. I would say integration.
Sure. To me, the two were very related.
Right. I mean, he was a pretty radical guy back in his time. I've heard stories of things that I probably shouldn't repeat on air, but he was very active and, as the kids might say, anti-racist, but in terms of like actual street fighting with neo-Nazis. But as he grew older, he was definitely more of a it's funny because this guy got brought up in this film, but he was more of a Cosby American. The idea like, hey, yeah, we fought the struggle, we won, we've been accepted. The people who don't accept us, they don't matter anymore. We've got the free will to make we could become doctors and lawyers, or we can become, drug dealers and losers. That's up to us. So yeah, I was kind of bathed in that view. I never really saw myself as like, oh, I've got black friends, or oh, I've got, Asian friends. I've got friends, and that kind of thing. And we never made a big deal out of it. So yeah, and my dad, I don't think he would have ever identified as conservative because he was pretty anti-Republican in a lot of ways. But just as far as, understanding that there is a boat that was once rocky and was kind of settled and more heading more toward more stability. This idea, this idea of stirring things up, he would have been like, what the hell are you doing?
How would he have felt about the police brutality issue, the modern police brutality issue?
I don't think he would have seen it as not so much a racial problem. I can't speak for him. He's been dead for 14 years.
Right. We're just looking at his perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we were around for Rodney King, and I think he saw that as being a great injustice. And he was definitely around for riots from decades before. So yeah, that's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, these are all big subjects.
But he would not have been of the school of it's open season on black people, cops are out to kill people who aren't white. He would not have bought into any of that.
So you how do you identify in this sense? I think of myself primarily as a New York City filmmaker because that's what I do. That's what I do most of the time, and that's how I connect to the public. How do you identify as a half African American person, or do you identify as Ian the artist?
I'm definitely Ian the artist. It's funny because when I was growing up, I thought it was kind of cool to identify as half black or mixed race. Now I pretty much only bring it up in the context of conversations about race. It's funny because you might have even seen this on some of the live streams that I've done with, Earth's Mightiest Critics. Someone will make a comment like, well, it's just 4 white guys talking. I'm like, right. It's 3.5.
Yeah. That happened at the last episode, yeah.
Right, because at the same time, I also don't buy into this kind of hip self-loathing thing that white people do. Like, oh, it's just, it's just a bunch of white people talking. I'm like, not that I want to go all white identitarian, but like, I don't hear black people saying, oh, it's just, it's just a bunch of dumb black people expressing their views. Like, screw that.
It's,
don't be white and proud, but just don't be white and embarrassed.
Well, yeah, any excess, I mean, just like nationalism, racial identities, ethnic identities come with a lot of, too much of it can be a danger because we see tribal fighting in human history going back forever. One group saying we're a little bit better than these other people, let's take over their land. So yeah, it's a tough subject, something to be kept at arm's length I think personally, when it comes to ethnic tribalism, racial tribalism.
Right, because and getting kind of to finish what I was saying, when I was younger, I thought that was kind of a point of pride is the wrong word, but when people ask me like, "Oh yeah, I've got a black dad and a white mom, and I'm kind of a mixed race kid," now because race has become so prevalent in the conversation, I'm like, I don't even want to think about it. Why does this matter? I'm just a guy trying to support his family and get through the day and talk about movies and make art occasionally. I'm much more along the lines of what you're thinking of, like, you're a filmmaker, I'm an artist, we're all people. Race does not enter my consciousness unless someone tries to point out a racial thing. I'm like, well, why am I even thinking about that? Does it really matter in this context?
Since you read visually as white, have you had weird encounters with other white people, maybe racist, saying weird things about minorities?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been in rooms where people have made ethnic jokes and racist jokes and all that other stuff, but that's the other strange thing about this moment we're in, is people seem to think that there's never been a time when that was not. I mean, I think it all depends on context. There's a difference between making a racist or racially tinged or culturally tinged joke at someone's expense in a way that's meant to hurt them, versus say you've got a bunch of people of different backgrounds, like 20 years ago, the office that I worked in was very diverse. We had white people and black people and Asian people and Hispanic people, and we would make ethnic jokes to each other on company time, like on lunch breaks and stuff. It wasn't a regular thing.
Right.
We knew that we could say something and it wouldn't be, it wasn't like we were trying to say, I'm saying this and I'm laughing because you're inferior. It's just, people kind of ribbing each other. Now it's all verboten. And there's this idea that if you tell a racially tinged joke, that means that you're a supremacist and need to be, kicked off social media because you're a bad person. I think that's one of the reasons we're kind of seeing the death of edgy comedy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue. I mean, if you're a member of a minority and you hear negative things even in jest, it might be hurtful. But yeah, with all speech, I think there needs to be for artists especially. I mean, there's a difference between a comedian who's an artist and someone who's secretly in the KKK and
yes.
and trying to do jokes,
Right. And I think we're all in this, like, again, 20, 30 years ago, if I feel like there was more of a cultural sensitivity to that, where you could pick it out and just say, that is really funny, or that's offensive and you need to go away now. Now it's everything is, if there's the slightest chance that someone could be offended by something. And my question is, what's wrong with offense? Like, how does that, there's this whole idea of like speech is violence and it's harmful and all that stuff. Maybe, but there's also something to be said for, kind of thickening up and getting on with your life. Unless someone is in a position of authority and is actually bullying you or, trying to set fire to your house. It's like
calling for a race war, like in Rwanda.
Yes, but I mean, you don't really see that here on the the pleasant shores of the United States.
Not yet.
Right.
So let's keep it that way.
But that's actually something interesting to point out, is like all the problems that we quote unquote have in America right now, a lot of these social problems, you go to other parts of the world where there are, people fighting in the streets for literally their right to exist against authoritarian racist governments. And then you come back over here and it's like, oh my God, someone, made a homophobic joke. My life is over. I think people from like 95% of the other countries in the world, if you were to tell them that, they'd probably laugh in your face and punch you. Like that, really, that's what you're concerned about.
Yeah, well, yeah, different countries, different concerns. But yeah, real ethnic hatred in the old world is a long running thing. And luckily, the US has not experienced it to the same level. Then again, we've had slavery here for 400 years. So
no, we had slavery for 400 years. And that's one of the things that kind of drives me crazy, is a lot of the conversation now seems to be about looking back.
Mhm.
And they say, yes, but this is the country that had slaves for 400 years. And I say, yes, and we also got rid of that. And after that, we had the civil rights struggle, because for hundreds of years after slavery, there were still problems. But we addressed those problems. And
not completely, but it's an ongoing thing.
But here's the thing, it is an evolution.
Mhm.
And there, again, it's something about this millennial construct, this notion of, I showed up and things aren't perfect, so that means everything has to be deconstructed and criticized. I'm like, can you just give it a little bit of time? Like a little.
Right.
Okay.
One more thing. We'll get back to this never-ending.
Yeah, we'll talk about the movie at some point, I promise.
Right. We'll get back to in the upcoming episodes. We'll discuss race, ethnicity, other problems. One last thing.
That'd be a great name for the show, by the way. Race, ethnicity, and other problems.
and movies. Showtime. Yes. Now, similar thing happens to me in my neighborhood ever so often. We have a lot of people from Arab countries, really people from all over the world here. Every couple of months, like I'm at some shop and someone's talking to me about, how the Jews control the media or saying some anti-Semitic things. I'm like, whoa, hold on, man.
Right.
No, that's not how I feel about Jewish people. Let's not have that conversation.
But no, I mean, but that's I think that's the way you deal with it. Like, right. There seem to be these giant kind of cultural, racial, and ethnic boogeymen or boogie people.
Boogie people.
Right. These assumptions about how, there's a secret clan member behind every, around every corner, where real day-to-day racism, if you experience it, that's just not my world. Maybe that's true. But if you experience it every once in a while and it comes up in the context of what you're describing, where someone in confidence thinks that it's okay to say something as outrageous as that, then you can just kindly say, I'm sorry, I don't feel that way. Please, let's just change subjects or just ring up my order so I can leave, whatever it happens to be.
No, if I have time, I talk to them saying, this is how it happened, World War II, the Nazis, these, protocols of Zion nonsense. This is why some people now think Jews control the world. This is not an accurate, understanding. And some people are like, all right, I'll think about that.
But that is the compassionate, understanding, educational spirit that I think that's how you defeat these horrible ideas. Not I'm going to report you and have your business shut down or whatever. I'm going to cancel you and make sure that you can't feed your family, because all that does is entrench people. It almost reaffirms their idea that there's a global conspiracy against their way of life, whatever they happen to be, if they're Arab or white supremacist or whatever. I'm always a fan of communicating and getting ideas out. It's just that sometimes those ideas, even ones that are benevolent, can be seen as not pure enough in the cancellation sense.
Yeah, freedom of speech is essential for art and politics, and this sort of an experimental country we have here, historically speaking, so it should be protected. So onto the show, we invited Tambe Benson. He was unable to do it.
From IndieWire,
From IndieWire. He's an expert on Black cinema. And I invited another friend of mine who is an African-American filmmaker. She said she didn't really have anything to say about the movie. So here we are. Let us continue with the movie.
No, I just want to rewind the tape on that one. She said she didn't have anything to say. Is that because she didn't like it, or maybe she talked about it already, or what?
I think she already has talked about it, because in the indie world and African-American film world, Medicine for Melancholy is a old story. So I think that was the case.
And that's one of the things I like about having these conversations with you, is this is a new story to me. That's
right. That's why I like talking to you, getting the word out to a different segment of the population.
And that's the thing, is again, I can't fault this movie for being anything but, it's a cool film. It feels like the emergence of a new voice, which turns out it was. Just as from the filmmaking standpoint, I was going to ask you, how do you describe this movie's color palette? It's not sepia toned, it's not black and white, it's not full color, but it's just this almost like a gray haze. Like the scene, one of the early scenes where Micah and Joe, after they wake up from their one night stand at a party in San Francisco, they kind of sneak out and they're just trying to figure out, who each other are, and they're walking up this hill and they can see the city. It's almost black and white, but she's wearing this almost like an off-color pink, maybe it's a tangerine top or something. It's like the only real bit of color in this. What do you call that?
This is the color grade is a desaturation. They've taken out a lot of the color in many scenes or certain scenes. I read an interview saying where Jenkins was saying in scenes where they're not talking about race or real estate or gentrification, he left more color in. And when they are talking about political matters like the ones I mentioned, it's more desaturated. And one of the justifications he gave was to sort of reflect the steady reduction of Black people in San Francisco and other minorities because they're being priced out. And this is a real problem in San Francisco to this day. My sister worked there for a while, and I think she was paying like $3,000 in rent a month for an apartment. And that meant very little of her pay was, accessible beyond paying rent.
Right.
So, San Francisco, I don't know if they have rent control, but in New York, we have 1 million units that are rent regulated. And the city is trying to do commercial real estate rent control, and the city is trying to expand rent control because New York has the same problem with housing. Large corporations are buying up buildings and apartment buildings and houses to use as investment vehicles and just to do business with, which prices out regular people.
Yeah, it's not a recent phenomenon, but I know with the pandemic, like in the last 6 months, there've been all these stories about, like, was it BlackRock, I think is one of the big firms that's buying up all this property. I thank God that I bought a house when I did 11 years ago. But the gentrification stuff, I did pick up on that because there is a montage of sort of like what San Francisco is in the popular imagination. It was very kind of fast and colorful and slick. And then you get back to these, desaturated characters, as you mentioned. It's interesting because they do at one point, and I should just mention, this is much like the Linklater stuff we discussed. It's 24 hours in the life of this couple who are strangers when we meet them and when they kind of meet each other in the film, and they get to know each other over the course of this day to, kind of tumultuous results. But later on, they're walking, I think it's the next evening, they're walking just in downtown, and they come across, it's almost like an open air, it's in a almost like a open air storefront or something, but it's a meeting of people talking about the gentrification. And they're, I think all except for one person were white, from what I could tell. I mean, by this point, it was practically a black and white sequence, because I think it was dark, it was nighttime. But I thought that was interesting. I mean, you say that it was pushing out the blacks and minorities from San Francisco, but it's kind of pushing it, but it's kind of pushing out everybody. It's more of a class economic thing than race. And it was very interesting because the people who are sounding most concerned about this, who are articulating the problem, were this group of white people.
Yeah, there's lots of leftist organizations or activist organizations who throughout the country who fight this gentrification issue. But yeah, I mean, San Francisco also has a lot of white people, so some of them are concerned about the issue. Same thing in New York. I think that that's just the meeting that they had access to, or that's just the actors, and that's what they were able to do on this $15,000 movie. This was a super low budget movie. I think they shot whatever they could in the time that they had. But I like that scene. I mean, it doesn't smoothly flow with rest of the movie, little bit. But I like that the movie brought in a little bit of real world politics. So if you watch the movie a second time, knowing the political content, you'll be able to pay attention more, I think, to the two characters and their interactions. There's a lot of charming, funny stuff happening And that's what I saw yesterday when I watched it again.
Well, just one thing to bring it back to Linklater for a second. You're right. That scene does stand out, but it reminded me a lot of Waking Life, in that, you know, the kind of the traveling dream character in that movie would come across. He'd go into a building or he'd pass, you know, a group of people, and then we would just stand there with the audience watching someone monologue or two people have a conversation, and they would move on. That's very much what, you know, it does stand out. It doesn't really work with the rest of the film, but I feel like because I've been kind of studying the language of Linklater with you in the last, you know, year or so, it didn't bother me. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, without feeling like he was aping what Linklater was doing.
Right.
But yeah, the thing about the characters, and you know, this is, again, it's a strictly personal issue that I had with that kind of middle before movie, is the fact that these, first of all, when these characters wake up, I love the details that are in this movie.
It's a nice building they wake up in.
It is a nice building, but what I thought was cool is when they're waking up, everything seems a little bit odd. We see Wyatt Cenac's character, Micah, brushing his teeth, like kind of splashing water in his face, and he brushes his teeth, but he doesn't use a toothbrush. He's just like putting toothpaste or something on his gums and doing this. And then we see Joe, the girl that he's with, in bed. She wakes up and she sees him kind of sideways because she's laying down in bed.
That's a nice shot.
Right, and she gets up to use the bathroom and she does that thing. I'm like, do they not have toothbrushes? What's the deal? And then you see them sneaking downstairs. There's a pile of shoes in the corner. I'm like, oh, this was a party. Like they're waking up together in someone else's house. And it's not just that it's a cool way to introduce the idea. It's just that detail. Like, this is probably someone who's very particular about, like, they're the one of the people, like, if you're going to come into my place, take off your shoes. Everything goes in the corner.
Right.
But when they get out into the city, she is very cold to him. She's giving, like, if she's giving answers, to like one word answers, he's trying to engage her. She's very off-putting. They go to coffee, and, you know, there's some terse dialogue. He says, how do you pay rent? And she says, who says I pay rent? and then eventually he says, so you're not going to ask what I do for a living? And she says, no. I'm like, all right, so maybe they slept together. That had not necessarily been established, whether they just fell asleep drunk in the same bed or if they actually had sex. But for me, I'm cutting and running. Like, there's nothing. But a few scenes later, he shows up at her place because she leaves her purse in the cab. And her attitude, she's kind of cold and standoffish, but then in the middle of the scene, she starts to kind of open up. Right. I'm like, this guy isn't that charming. He's also kind of creepy if you look at it in a different context. I felt like this was the movie, like Jenkins not quite having that connective tissue. He's like, okay, I got to get these characters to want to spend time with each other. They're just going to artificially warm up. And when we find out that Joe has a boyfriend who's this art, you know, dealer or art curator who's overseas in London on a job, and then she's spending this entire day together with this guy, her level of moral conflict seems to kind of come in and out of the plot again when it's convenient for her to be upset about something. But this whole time watching these two people, like, be charmed and, you know, be witty with each other, I'm thinking, how charming and witty would her boyfriend think about this if he were to walk in on them? You know, it's this whole idea of the infidelity of the film, and the film not really feeling that there was a problem with it. I'm like, yes, I'm sure there are people like that. You may know people like that. If I know people like that, they have kept it very much hidden from me. I don't find this enjoyable to watch. I'm like, if they were just regular, quote unquote, regular people falling in love, kind of like Jesse and Celine in that first film, I'd be like, I'm all on board.
Yeah, I have an entirely different reading of the entire movie regarding that, because regular people sometimes start new relationships while they're in another one, and they wrap up the previous one and they move on. So I see this movie, I see a positive future for these two characters.
Even at the end, because she just straight up leaves him.
Yes, that's just the end of the first day. I see seeds being planted, and Joe questioning her relationship with the guy that she is with now. So I see her leaving, and I see these two getting back together. If Jenkins were to make 10 years later, I see these two kids together. Here are some of the reasons. First, they must have hooked up and they must have had a good time the night before.
Yeah, they did. They established that they had later.
Yeah, so we just see them in the morning, and in the morning, I think Joe is starting to question her behavior the night before.
Right.
And also, if Joe is out hanging out with people and hooking up with people, she's probably halfway out of the old relationship, the current relationship to begin with. So I see this as either the transitional relationship or one that leads to her leaving her current guy and starting some new relationships, possibly with Micah. So she takes a long time to warm up. And yeah, once we find out about her living situation, her relationship situation, it's easier to see why she acts conflicted. But obviously she likes this guy. He keeps trying to a couple times end things and go home, and she keeps saying, let's go here, let's spend more time together. And she's had many chances to wrap things up. So she's checking him out to see if this could be a future boyfriend. That's how I read that movie. So temporary indecisiveness, temporary, if you know you're getting out of a relationship, it's okay to see what the other options are. I mean, it's not as clean as ending it and starting a new one, but in real life, this kind of thing happens quite often.
Well, I know, and we had that discussion in the Before Sunset conversation. I know this thing happens, but that doesn't change, again, my own personal feelings on, I cannot get on board with a character who's doing this. Because again, if he, not even if he walked in, but like she understands that what she's doing is, wrong. She has these kind of like, the boyfriend calls her like once or twice, and there might have been some texting, and she's like, hey baby, I love you, and all this other stuff, right? It's deceitful. And if she were to have this, kind of conversation with him, I almost guarantee it would end up in a fight, because the other issue is she never talks about him other than professionally. She doesn't say, oh, he's away all the time, I'm lonely, he beats me, emotionally distant. He could be the nicest guy in the world. We also know that it's inferred that he's white, because she never quite answers that question. Micah kind of asks her, is he white, or is your boyfriend white? And she kind of like dodges, but it's inferred that it's a mixed relationship. And that topic comes up a couple of times during the movie, so that's very interesting. But because we're seeing things completely subjectively from her point of view, I kept wondering, well, what's this relationship about? Because if it turns out, yeah, he's an emotionally abusive asshole, and she's finding a connection with this other guy, that's fine, but he could also be just a regular dude, and she's the problem. Because they have sex 2, possibly 3 times in the course of 24 hours. And first of all, I'm thinking, Jesus, who has that much stamina? But the other thing is, like, this whole idea of, after the first time, I get it. The second time, okay. But by the third time, she's got one foot out the door, but she also is kind of questioning, they don't seem to really get along. There's charm and everything, but they are coming from 2 different points of view, worldviews.
Yeah, I think they're not so as much apart as it seems from the dialogue and the interactions, I think, because she keeps coming back and she keeps hanging out with him and spends an extra night. She didn't really have to do that.
No.
So I think in the end, I think we're seeing the start of a new relationship. That's how I see it, because even he is kind of, he sort of has a non-assimilationist, a little bit separatist stance when it comes to the racial stuff, even though he's in the multi-ethnic indie rock scene in San Francisco. So I think even he is softening up a little bit towards her perspective on things by the end of the movie.
Yeah, but I've been putting a lot of this negativity on Joe. I want to talk about Micah for a bit
Mhm.
because I think he's kind of a dirtbag as well. It's one thing to hook up with a girl, one night stand at a party. It happens all the time. The next day, he goes over to her place to return the purse. That's fine. But, he finds out that she doesn't pay rent because she's, her boyfriend is the one who pays the rent. Now,
Mhm.
again, there are certain people who would say, that's
Gotta
cool.
go.
I still
Gotta
no.
go.
He would say, I don't care if you got a boyfriend. I think you're hot, and I want you to be mine.
Mhm.
And would kind of rope her into doing all this fun. Let's go explore African history and all this other stuff. And the other people will be like, oh, you've got a boyfriend. That's great. I'm don't tell him that we did that last night because I don't want him to beat me up. And then he just like leaves. But no, he's constantly pursuing her, and when she pursues him, he's down for it. There's a really kind of a disturbing line, especially now in the advent of the Me Too era and our understandings about consent. When it turns out, like when they're over coffee, they don't know each other's names
Mhm.
because he's like, I think I forgot your name, or maybe we never even introduced ourselves. And she was like, yeah, that never happened. And then he said, yeah, you were pretty drunk last night. It
Mhm.
wasn't, we were pretty drunk last night. He said, you were pretty drunk last night, which led me to think maybe he was kind of tipsy or whatever, but she was possibly incapacitated when they hooked up. So
No idea.
I'm right, but again, the film doesn't take any kind of a stance on this, so I'm just left with the facts I'm presented. I'm like, these characters might have a future together. I don't. That's not something I'm rooting for. I don't
Mhm.
find them to be interesting enough or compelling enough outside of the context of the stuff that I'm finding very questionable to really care.
Mhm. No, I like the characters. So we have a thumbs down, thumbs up, thumbs
I
down.
I
I'm thumbs
love
up.
I love the performances. I think
Good,
if
good.
there's a cut where they take out the 3 sentences of problematic dialogue,
Right.
I'm all
You'd
in
be
for
on
Micah
board.
and Joe.
Got it. No. So so I liked some of the things I liked. I'm glad they got this done on a low budget.
It doesn't
Barry,
look like it though.
I know
Like
they did a really
it's
great job.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Barry Jenkins pulled in a free crew. I think a lot of his buddies from film school, and they had some savvy producers who posted stuff on my blog, and then South by Southwest discovered the movie. Cinematography is good, the script is good, direction is good,
I want
acting
to
is good, editing is good. It was a good idea to do that desaturated look. It's almost like a black and white look, but it's with color, so it stands out. And overall, I'm very happy with the movie.
Well, I want to ask you about this because the cinematography and the sound editing, the music choices, I think were really cool. A lot of like
Mhm.
kind of instrumentals. But the when they go to that dance club,
I like that.
there was a scene where there's like I guess he's the DJ, but he's sort of there's a white guy. He's dressed up in kind of a suit,
Yeah.
and he's at the boards or whatever. And when we see him, there's like a strobe light behind him, but because it is so desaturated, it's practically black and white. It almost looks like the strobe effect is causing his head. When we see his head, and then it almost explodes into this giant burst of light, and then his
Mhm.
head comes back into the frame, and it's this really. And then we see Micah and Joe dancing. It's very sensuous and everything. But then we cut back to this weird strobing headlight DJ guy. Like this is really surreal and fun and not what I'd expect. Like Linklater never did this stuff in,
Mhm.
in his
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah,
And
that was a good scene, fun dance scene, and I like the lighting effects that they used in that.
well, also the carousel ride that they go on.
That was
Uh,
nice.
there's this really cool lyrical romantic score to that. And then when the ride stops, that song, that instrumental fades out and then gradually fades up the regular carnival kind of carousel music, but it's seamless. It's not harsh. It's like their fantasy, let's be romantic on this carousel is transporting them to this other world, and then they gradually kind of come back out into the real world when they get off. Like I don't
Mhm.
see that kind of subtlety and nuance a lot in any kind of movies. It was really nice to see it here.
Yeah, it's good filmmaking. And as far as diversity, yeah, a lot of indie films and or mainstream movies, we don't really see black characters in a lot of indie movies that get sort of a IFC and beyond level distribution. but that's changing as more Black filmmakers make indie movies, and casting in Hollywood movies is also changing.
Yeah, I really liked the cast here. That's the thing is I didn't care for most of the characters, but I thought the performances were wonderful. Even when I was really annoyed with the characters, I realized on some level that's because they're doing such a great job of being aggravating, outside of my own personal stuff. Like they're getting on each other's nerves. They're kind of exposing, calling each other on their bullshit. I loved Joe's kind of whole riff on Black History Month, which I confess I didn't understand. I didn't know the history behind that. I was kind of like with Micah on that whole meme about they call it Black History Month. They gave it to the blacks because it's the shortest month. And no, there's a whole story which I won't spoil here. You can either Wikipedia or I would recommend watching the movie because it's a great exchange.
So was it interesting for you to see the diverse cast in this indie movie? A lot of movies we discuss are mostly white cast. No, but
that's the thing. And it gets back to, again, sort of the way I was raised. And this is I'm still trying to figure out how to articulate this because I thought this would come up.
Sure.
But here's the thing, like it's kind of like in the advent of color television, like 30 years after that, people talking about how amazing it is that we have color television and things used to be in black and white. For me, I grew up watching, this is partially probably to my dad's credit.
Probably.
He showed me a lot of, from early on movies with diverse casts, because again, this is now millennial advent where like all of a sudden there's black people in movies. There've been minorities, POC in films going back, decades and decades, and television. 70s. Right. He exposed me to a lot of that. So when people say, well, we're finally getting representation, I'm like, well, where have you been? Now, it might not be to the degree that a lot of people are satisfied with. And I understand that to a certain extent. And I'm glad that if this was a movie that put, Black independent filmmakers on the radar, I think that's great. But my question would probably be more like, how large is the Black independent filmmaking community? Is it that there aren't, just in terms of proportion, that there are more white filmmakers out there, or is it or is it Hollywood gatekeeping, or okay, so what is the solution? And the solution, I think, is movies like this getting on people's radar and getting that respect. And we've seen a lot of progress in the last 10 years, but it doesn't impress me that there are minorities and people of color making movies and being in movies, because I just always assumed like you can do it. Like, especially nowadays, you can make movies on your phone.
Yeah. Well, as I was complaining in 2007, to make it in the indie world or the Hollywood world, you need support from critics, producers, distributors, media, just a whole number of people. The U.S. history when it comes to not television has improved. When it comes to motion pictures at the Hollywood level, and then at the indie level since the 80s, the mainstream white industry largely, kept minorities out. Now, this is because of other factors also, because historically, Hollywood didn't cast Black actors because they didn't want to offend racist people in the South. Sure. They wanted those people to buy their movies. Also, there was the belief that in certain overseas countries, movies with the Black cast would not do well.
Well, I mean, that's still a problem that we're dealing with today.
That's what they say. But
I mean, you can look at the marketing of the last Star Wars trilogy and the way that they shoved John Boyega. Like, if they didn't remove him from the poster, they shoved him towards the back. I mean,
yeah. You're saying the promoting Black actors overseas is still a problem. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. True. Yeah. So what we're seeing with Medicine for Melancholy, historically speaking, two important things. One, the start of a director who goes on to create 4 major works that employs a lot of minority/Black actors and does really well critically, and I assume business-wise, because he keeps making more movies. And 2, the indie scene about 10 years before the Hollywood scene, the indie film world, festivals, and indie distributors opening up more to minority-led indie film projects, which is beneficial, which has been beneficial to many people, probably myself included, over the last 20 years.
So what's the catalyst for that? You said like 10 years before that, or around that time, or
10 years from now, this 2007. The catalyst is just history. People realizing that Jarmusch, Linklater, a lot of other stars, Wes Anderson, a lot of other stars in the indie world are white, filmmaking stars, except Spike Lee at that point, 2000, early 2000s, 2005 or so. And plus 1995, we had Dogma 95, when filmmakers started using digital video for filmmaking. And then that allowed more people in lower income, with less money to experiment with filmmaking. So all that comes up. And by 2007, we have Medicine for Melancholy. After that, now making indie films with a black lead is not a completely new thing. It's sometimes it's not even remarkable, because it happens much more often now. Not to the same level. I mean, again, other than Wes Anderson, other than Spike Lee and Barry Jenkins, we don't really have too many or a lot of black directors who are doing mainstream, widely distributed indie type work. So there's a ways to go, but this is nevertheless progress.
Yeah. I think I have nothing to add to that.
All right.
I just didn't know if there was something in 2007, and maybe I feel like there needs to be a not that I'm trying to take anything away from your explanation, but I feel like there needs to be something more there, because people suddenly realizing that does not translate into a business transforming the way. Like, I'm wondering, was there a big movie, or was there like 3 big filmmakers by minority characters, or not characters, but
you're assuming there needs to be one or a few simple things that need to happen at a given point in time. No, I'm saying.
Well, but I'm saying you're saying 2007 was sort of like the year that
that's when this movie was made. So I'm saying,
it came out in 2008. So I guess, like,
so I'm saying over 40 years from the indie filmmaking with Spike Lee started around 85, right? And then by the time we got to the 2000s, we still didn't have very many mainstream recognized indie filmmakers who are black. And then this movie, by 2005, 2007, this was made, 2008 it's released. And then we started seeing the film festivals.
So you're kind of saying that Medicine for Melancholy was that catalyst.
No, I'm saying historical events lined up, and Medicine for Melancholy came out around the same time. Those two sort of coincided in 2007. After that, because of medicine and historical events, we have more diverse filmmaking. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, I guess I'm just saying, if Medicine for Melancholy hadn't come out, I don't know, like this 40 years of historical events, that would have just been history.
No.
Right?
I think other movies by other black directors would come out. If Medicine wasn't picked up, there would have been other. We can research what movies by black directors came out around the same time.
Yeah.
But black directors, indie, Hollywood, and television numbers have gone way up since 2000 to now 2021.
Yeah.
I'm saying the climate was right for this kind of a movie. And then if it wasn't Medicine, it would have been some other black director movie.
Yeah, and as we established at the beginning of the show, you are partially responsible for Medicine getting on the radar. Yes, I don't want to take away, I think, from Barry Jenkins or the people who actually made the movie, but it's also really cool that you wrote that piece, that you had that indie film, the DIY film blog out there as a sounding board for people to communicate with each other and share ideas. And then one of those ideas led to, hey, I've got this movie that I'm getting off the ground. And then someone from South Boy is like, that's what we're looking for. We want to see something that's different. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I'm very happy. I'm amused and very happy that it happened. overall, very happy with the Medicine movie and Barry Jenkins's career trajectory. Also, I like the fact that the indie scene, regardless of how it may have been 10, 20 years ago, is now more open for diversity. A lot of mainstream festivals are offering discounted entry fees to Black directors and are encouraging more Black talent to submit stuff, join their workshops, and participate. So everyone wants to, add more diversity to the indie filmmaking world, which I'm happy about. Most people.
The only hitch there is I disagree with the discount for Black directors entering, because that, I don't know what that's about.
It's to make it easier because I do this myself. If if I'm submitting to a large festival and I mean, not just Black directors, they also offer discounts to whatever demographic they want to expand into. Female directors, people from, former Eastern Europe, people from Asia, whatever. So that, festivals do that to encourage people to submit, to take away part of the risk that comes with submitting to festivals, because filmmakers can spend hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars submitting to festivals and contests and workshops and never see that money again.
Right, but I mean, I guess that's true for white filmmakers too. I mean, if you got a white filmmaker and a Black filmmaker both coming from the same like demographic, they both have to pony up if they want to get into a festival. I say level the playing field and just lower your festival fees if that's what you're trying to do.
No, what they're trying to do is, if your festival has for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years has mostly been championing white filmmakers, it's fine for a certain limited period of time to encourage other people to submit.
Well, but here's the thing. I don't think that they've been, I'm not in anybody's heads, but I don't think they've been championing white filmmakers.
They have.
No, here's the thing. I feel like, again, I could be speaking completely out of turn. There could be some secret cabal where they're like, damn it, they're onto us. Our white nationalist filmmaking ethos is being challenged. I feel like, yes, it was a consequence of the culture and the environment that the white filmmakers were getting promoted, but I don't think it was an intentional thing. Like, we've got to keep those Blacks out of our film festival. Now, as you said, the tides, now there might have, but again, we've had this conversation too.
Sure.
If that's true, then a lot of this animus about justice, social justice and stuff has to be aimed at the left, because these festivals aren't run by the right. So if you've got a bunch of guilty liberals who have been promoting white filmmakers at the expense of Black filmmakers and minority filmmakers whom they claim to love, that is a problem. But it's
the right-left division is also nonsense, like religions and politics, in the sense that we're talking about things that happened over half a decade, more than 100 years in Hollywood. So we have to take a look at every festival. All I'm saying is, if I run a festival and I want more Black filmmakers in it for whatever reason, being a private nonprofit entity, I can totally do whatever it takes to bring in more submissions from Black directors. Also, there have been mostly Black festivals running for the last 20 years.
Sure, yeah.
Because filmmakers and others have felt that the Sundance and the major mainstream, mostly white festivals are not as interested in their work as the Black festivals are. But now things are starting to change.
Yeah, and again, I'm fine with that. I just don't. I don't think that a young filmmaker who's trying to get their foot in the door needs to be responsible for the entire history of inequity in the industry that they're trying to break into.
But the industry does. It is.
Well, yeah,
it's up to the programmers.
Right. Then the industry can do what they need to do to attract that talent and get that diversity of filmmakers. But I think that setting different prices for entry for people based on race is not a solution to the problem.
Okay, so we disagree on that. I think temporarily that's fine. So what else? Any closing thoughts?
But I mean, but but here's the thing, like, if let's take the black and white out of it, do you
Sure.
think that it's fair to have different pricing based on race, different standards based on race? Because I feel like
Depends on,
that's what we've been fighting against in the American experiment for, as imperfect as it is.
no. Depends on where we are talking about. Let's take a look at China, right? China wants to attract, and actually, this kind of thing has always happened in various countries. China wants to attract more American businesses. Let's say India, because China's a weird case. India wants to attract more American businesses to come set up shop in India because they want the American money, they want the connection to the American business world, American government, blah, blah, blah. Lots of benefits in doing business with America. So they create incentives for American businesses to go set up shop, incentives that their own people may not get.
Well, but that's an American business is not a white business. There are people,
I know,
Chinese people and
but it's the
different
same concept. It's the same concept.
Not really, because you're discriminating against someone based on their immutable characteristics.
No. But
if there's a white filmmaker and a black filmmaker and they both want to get into the same festival, if there's an admission fee, I say they both pony up for it if they really want to be in that festival. It also is kind of denigrating to the black filmmaker. It's like, why do I need some kind of a discount? I can pay, the extra $100.
No,
same as the white guy.
I see businesses discount and countries just make it easier for certain time periods for people to come do business with them. I mean, if you look at wealth in America, whites versus African Americans or Asians, everyone. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but the average white household has wealth that is several times higher than the average black household. So there's a economic difference tied to racial perceptions, how people are perceived in America.
Sure, I don't understand what that has to do with submitting to a film festival.
I'll explain. If the majority of white filmmakers are coming from backgrounds with more money, and majority of the black filmmakers are not, based on actual economic data from the government, then the festival can make the assumption unknown filmmakers, black filmmakers trying to break out, it's possible they do not have the same resources and they may use it strategically. So if we lower our entry fee, we become more competitive for those filmmakers. That's the reasoning.
Yeah, but sure. But I mean, you're talking about filmmakers starting out. I'm not comfortable lumping in people into these giant categories.
But they exist in the world.
Right, but if I'm Joe Blow filmmaker and I come from a trailer park in Arkansas and I'm trying to tell this, my version of, Medicine for Melancholy, if someone looks at me and says, oh, he's white, he must come from better economic circumstances than this other black filmmaker who lives a town over. By the way, that town happens to be more well off financially than the poor neighborhood this white kid comes from. And this black filmmaker is actually the son of a millionaire, but we're going to give him a discount. It just, again, I believe in meritocracy and level playing fields. I understand historically that's not the way it is, but I think
historically it hasn't been. America, that's not how America has run historically. Even now, that's not how it's run.
Right, but I'm saying,
I mean,
I'm in more of an aspirational kind of a mindset. Like, we haven't had a level playing field, but I think trying to implement more playing fields that are not level is not the way to go.
You're just reading it a certain way based on your political views. But from the standpoint of a festival wanting to attract more diversity, making it easier for more diverse filmmakers to submit to them is a great strategy.
I guess I don't understand why it's so, like, what lowering the entry fee has to do with attracting more talent. I mean, they could just not have an entry fee if they wanted to.
Lowering the entry fee for a group of people that they want in the festival may encourage more people from that group to submit. That's just one strategy that they use. They use lots of other strategies. Sometimes some festivals during the pandemic did take out all the entry fee requirements.
Do we know how that shook out yet?
I don't know the details because those festivals, these were festivals that usually do live events, but they did all online
virtual.
because it was a weird situation.
Yeah.
So at some point, from my casual view is that from what I see, casually strolling, checking out websites and reading about festivals, they are becoming more diverse. The mainstream ones that used to be 20 years ago, mostly white, are creating more space, are programming more multi-ethnic fare. I mean, most of it's going to be white because it's mostly a white country, but they are expanding. They are becoming more diverse as to what kind of movies they program, which makes a big deal for people starting out, like Barry Jenkins. Once you get into Sundance or South by Southwest, other people with money, and the media take you more seriously.
Yeah, for sure.
Or if you get into Facets, or if you get on, Kicking the Seed podcast.
Well, we're kingmakers here for sure.
Definitely.
But,
I heard you have some Kennedys, some Rockefellers coming up on the show.
Yeah, it's going to be very one of the conversations I haven't had yet, but I talked to Bobby Kennedy III. So that'll be coming up on Friday. I think Thursday I'm talking to Wyatt Rockefeller, who's got a new movie coming out called Settlers. And then I talked to a guy who's one of Scorsese's longtime producers. So that's a lot of interesting conversations coming up. And it's funny because they are first-time filmmakers, but they're also like they're not like starting out like my first film is going to be a Fox multi-million-dollar thing. They're all like independent movies that are dropping like on demand.
Nice. So when we talk about diversity and multi-ethnic filmmaking, we're really talking about the history of America, the present, versus the ideal position we want to get into, right? This is an experimental country, comes out of the Enlightenment, all men are created equal, but it took us like 100 years to get rid of slavery. So it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
So there's the reality, there's the actual history, current reality, there's where we want to get to, and there's the ideals that were imagined hundreds of years ago that haven't fully been implemented anywhere on the planet, but we get closer than most people. So overall, I think I'm not as negative as some other liberal people are about the state of America or the state of the world, because whatever America adopts, goes out to other countries. We become more tolerant on race. Lots of other countries that look up to us openly or sacredly, or that we do business with, they also have to become more tolerant.
Yeah. That's one of the things I appreciate about you is your positivity and optimism about the human race.
Because I'm from another country and I know how bad things can be.
Right.
So Americans should spend all Americans should do a year or two abroad in the developing world.
I think that would be an excellent idea. That'd be a social program I could get behind. I don't know how the hell you'd manage it, and I don't know if they'd want all these Americans coming over.
I think Peace Corps did that for a number of years, a couple of decades. They sent volunteers to developing countries.
Yeah, I remember that from the movie Airplane.
There you
go. All right, man. Well, we've talked about a lot tonight. I'm going to let you go.
Right.
We even managed to talk about the movie a little bit, but
that's right.
But next month is going to be, and this is not a racial thing, but it's going to be my great white whale of talking about a film that I absolutely hated 10 years ago when I first saw it. But now I think that I'm speaking the language of slow cinema and independent film more fluently, and certainly not perfectly.
You've risen up in the world.
Right. I am finally ready to revisit The Tree of Life.
Right.
Not only that, but to watch the extended version, which is like an hour longer, however, much more extended it is. So
good. I look forward to it. And I'll get you Slow Romance screener soon, and we'll set up a date, you, me, and Aaliyah, to talk about it.
Definitely.
And July 19th, Monday, is the 2-year anniversary of Werewolf screening at Facets.
Oh my God. That's well, by the
Tomorrow.
time people are watching it, it's today.
Yeah.
So that's happy knowing
2
your
years.
anniversary. Yeah.
Good job, Art.
Yes, Art, we love you. We miss you. We got to get you back into conversation one of these days.
We'll get him in on the Werewolf 2. Also, politics aside, I think all humans are related. We need more unity. We need more peace, more prosperity, and calming down and talking about things.
Yes, and more movies.
More movies
where we explore these ideas and make them a reality.
That's right.
Sujewa, thank you again.
Great show.
Another wonderful Slowdown. We'll catch you next month, and I'm sure I'll talk to you in the meantime and hopefully be watching that movie soon.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.